Senator Deering would like to speak. I'll recognize you next. Senator Blackmon, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. And just like Senator Simmons, I love dogs, but I love humans more. In child neglect cases, if a parent, a guardian, or other person who intentionally, knowingly, or recklessly commits any act or omits the performance of any duty, which act or omission contributes to or tends to contribute to the neglect or delinquency of any child, or which act or omission results in the abuse of any child, shall be guilty of a misdemeanor, and upon conviction shall be punished by a fine not to exceed $1,000 or by imprisonment not to exceed 1 year in jail or both. If it's felonious child abuse, it's not less than 5 years and up to life as determined by the court. If it's a second act, it's not less than 2 years or more than 10 years. If it's simple and aggravated assault, where you negligently cause bodily injury to another human being, which may likely produce death or serious bodily harm, you can be punished by a fine of not more than $500 or by imprisonment in the county jail for not more than 6 months or both. Now, there is an exception related to simple assault, and in that exception, they list a lot of people, and one of those categories happen to be the legislature. And while we're in session, or if we're performing our regular course of duties, then if someone were to commit harm to us, it would be punishable by a fine of not more than $1,000 or by imprisonment for not more than 5 years. Now, I love dogs. We have had several dogs. I love Castro, but I love our son, Madison Edward, more. I would like to see more stringent laws in place harming my son than Castro. I love Gator, but I love our son, Bradford Jerome, more. I would like to see more stringent laws in place harming my son than Castro. I love Spike, but I love my granddaughter, Enila Shanice, more. I would want to see more stringent laws in place harming my granddaughter than Spike. I loved King, but I love my granddaughter, Summer Rae, more. I would want to see more more stringent laws in place harming King than harming my granddaughter. Now, we've been talking about sick and horrific things that have been done to these dogs. Well, tell me about the sick and horrific things that are done to children, that are done to women who are abused. And yet for domestic abuse, you're talking about a fine of $1,000 and up to 5 years in prison. We talked about torturing and burning and scalding and maiming and dismembering and mutilating a dog. What about torturing and maiming and burning and mutilating and dismembering a child or a woman who has been the subject of domestic abuse? We should be just as passionate about that as we are passionate about talking about a fine of $1,000 and 10 years in prison for someone who has paraphernalia associated with the dog, a dog fight. We should be just as passionate about protecting our children and increasing the penalties for abuse of our children than we are about abusing a dog. We should be just as passionate about our vulnerable adults as we are about a dog. I had a friend and she loves dogs. And her dog became ill and the vet called her and said, it's going to require a $3,500 shot. And she said, a $3,500 shot is just a dog. She said, I'll mourn that dog, but I'll get up in the morning. But what about mourning the loss of your children, the loss of a spouse to domestic abuse? What about mourning the loss of your parents to being the victim of vulnerable adults? And the penalties for those heinous crimes are less than the penalties that you're talking about imposing right now for a dog's life.
Senator Watson, for what purpose you seek recognition?
Question.
Senator Blackmon, do you yield for a question?
I yield, Mr. President.
You're recognized, Senator Watson.
Thank you, Senator. And I appreciate your sentiments there, I really do, which really, in my opinion, aims at the heart of it anyway, aimed at the sanctity of life. And you mentioned maiming, which made me think of what the penalty should be for maiming an unborn child.
Well, I am quite certain, Senator Watson, that you probably have some bills that would address that. And this state, I think, has the most stringent laws in the nation as it relates to abortion. As I recall, Justice within the last few days, I don't know whether it was our side or the House side, but I know it was the House side, imposed that life begins at 15 months. So I am for the sanctity of life. I have given birth to 2 sons, so therefore I must be pro-life. But I also believe, just like I made that decision, everyone else, every woman, with the consultation with their family, should be able to make that decision as well.
So should the penalty for maiming an animal be more than the penalty for maiming an unborn child?
I really don't think there should be any penalties related to animals, so I can't address that question.
Thank you, Senator.
Senator Michelle, for what purpose do you seek recognition?
Question, please.
Do you yield, Senator Blackmon?
I yield.
You recognize Senator Michelle.
Thank you. Senator Blackmon, you compared the penalties that are contained in this dogfighting bill to penalties for abuse of vulnerable adults. And I know we enhanced those penalties. I think it's been at least 12 years, and I can't recall what we did on that. But are you correct? Are you sure that the penalties in this bill are more stringent than for abusing a vulnerable adult?
Senator Simmons was the one who brought out that. So, Senator Simmons, what are the
Well,
penalties?
you said it was. What?
No, I simply stated what Senator Simmons had brought out about the penalties being more stringent in this bill than the bill for vulnerable adults. But he came before me and he stated to this body what the penalties were.
What are they?
Whoever has it, can you read it?
Well, it's a couple of pages long. I just thought maybe you made the statement. I just want to make sure. I have a 96-year-old mom in a nursing home, and last Friday I had a dog die from lymphoma cancer, so I've got interest in both subjects.
Okay. Give it to me, Senator Simmons. I'll read it.
And I would support you in any enhanced penalties. You rattled off several subjects that you felt the penalties were too inferior, and I'd be glad to support you. Did you propose any legislation on any of those bills this year that would enhance the penalties on all those subjects?
Okay, for vulnerable adults, as it relates to if you knowingly exploit a vulnerable adult and you take less than $250, you'll be guilty of a misdemeanor, and upon conviction, you'll be punished by a fine not to exceed $5,000 or by imprisonment not to exceed 1 year in the county jail or both, where the value of the exploitation is $250 or more. The person who exploits a vulnerable adult shall be guilty of a felony, and upon conviction thereof shall be punished by imprisonment in the custody of Department of Corrections for not more than 10 years. So in this instance, it's the fine is $5,000, and it can be up to 10 years. And I believe in this here dog bill, the fine is $1,000 and not to exceed 10 years.
Okay, that was for stealing from a vulnerable adult, I believe you said. But let me ask you another
It
question.
says exploits.
Okay. Would you allow me to co-author a bill if you brought it forward on all these different subjects that you think these penalties should be enhanced, like child abuse?
Look, I think you would have a better shot at getting them passed, so I'd co-author them.
I'll help you. Let's work on it together.
I'll work with you on it. You can be the lead author.
Thank you.
Senator Hill, for what purpose do you seek recognition?
Question, Mr. Chairman.
Do you yield, Senator Blackmon?
I yield.
You recognize Senator Hill.
Thank you, Representative Blackmon. The first year I was here...
He's on the other side.
Excuse me, Senator Blackmon. The first year I was here, I, along with Senator Tindall, revamped the vulnerable adult statute because my grandfather was exploited when he was old. And the first thing we did was made that statute extend to 5 years instead of 2 years on the statute of limitation. And are you aware that number 3 under that chapter says, any person who willfully inflicts physical pain or injury upon a vulnerable adult shall be guilty of a felonious abuse or battery or both of a vulnerable adult, and upon conviction may be punished by imprisonment in the state penitentiary for not more than 20 years.
Yes, ma'am. I'm reading it with you.
So I just wanted to make sure that you knew that some of us who support dogs also have our names on strengthening some statutes that go along with vulnerable abuse and protecting unborn children as well.
Thank you, Senator Hill. Thank you, Senator Blackmon. No further questions at this time. I'm going to recognize Senator Deering, who would like to speak on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, I'm looking for Senator Hobson. Where'd he go?
You recognize Senator Deering.
I just wanted to thank you, Senator Hobson, for bringing my bill out. I appreciate you so much in the Judd A Committee. Just a little history, ladies and gentlemen of the Senate. For 10 to 12 years, I introduced legislation to put cats in the animal abuse statute, only pertain to dogs. And I was fought for 10 or 12 years, and finally, the opposition, we passed it through the Senate. But finally, the opposition in the House realized that I wasn't going away. And they finally put cats in the statutes. So, Senator Hobson, I'm not going away. I'm still going to try to make this bill as strong as I can next year.
Senator Hill, for what purpose you seek recognition?
I'd like to speak on the bill.
Go ahead and come forward. Senator Hill, you are recognized to speak on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Senator Hobson and Senator Deering. I have spoken, since domestic violence was brought up, I have spoken with the Domestic Violence Coalition, and I've looked at statistics on domestic violence cases where there's an overwhelming link between abusing animals and abusing people. Domestic violence, serial killers, all kinds of things are 100% definitely tied to animal abuse. So this is not just about animals. This is about deviant behavior. People that abuse animals also abuse people. There's no doubt about that. This has nothing to do with farming. This has something to do with sick people that get their kicks out of watching dogs bite, gnash, tear, bleed until the death, or until one of them has to be dragged out unconscious. That is barbaric practice. Just like Senator Watson said, it is a barbaric practice to take an unborn child out of the womb, limb for limb, and tear them apart as well. And I would hope that if that 15-week bill is brought over here, that the same passion would be shown if that bill gets to the floor about tearing these unborn babies apart. And like I said, the first year I was here, I worked hard to strengthen that vulnerable adult statute because I had a grandfather that was a general in the Army that was exploited and abused in his later years. So don't compare people trying to protect violent, vicious, vile things done with animals that they don't care about people, because they're tied together and you can't separate it. The Bible tells you in Proverbs to take care of your animals. Doesn't matter what they are. Tells you to be good stewards with what you use for food or how you take care of your animals. This is not just something we dreamed up. This is biblical. How you treat the most vulnerable says what you are as a society. And I ask that you support Senator Deering's bill because it is the decent thing to do. Thank you.
Seeing no further discussion at this time, Mr. Chairman, would you like to move final passage?